And now, right to your hosts of Down the Garden Path, Joanne Shaw and Matthew Dressing.
Welcome to Down the Garden Path, where we discuss down-to-earth tips and advice while doing our best to help you seasonally manage your garden and landscape. Hello there, I am Joanne Shaw, owner of Down to Earth Landscape Design, and with me is my co-host and co-author, Matthew Dressing.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Joanne, and thank you for joining us. I'm Matthew Dressing, owner of Natural Affinity Garden Design. As landscape designers and gardeners, we believe it's important and possible to have great gardens, which are sustainable and low maintenance, and we want to help you make it happen.
That's right. And so we're excited about tonight's show. As everyone knows, seeing a monarch butterfly is a wonderful sight, but such sightings have become fewer and further between over the last decade. In the news and social media this summer, word that the iconic monarch butterfly is in danger of extinction has many saddened and upset, asking, how could I possibly make a difference? On tonight's episode of Down the Garden Path, we're joined by Mary Phillips, head of Garden for Wildlife at the National Wildlife Federation, to introduce us to their wonderful initiatives and share with us how we can play our part in growing a bright future for the monarch butterfly and many other iconic native wildlife species. So, do you have a question for Mary about monarch butterflies? I know I do. About Garden for Wildlife, the National Wildlife Federation, or to the wonderful work she does? Send them here to Down the Garden Path podcast at hotmail.com.
And just before we welcome Mary to the show, we'll read a little bit about her, introduce you. So for 8 years, Mary has led Garden for Wildlife and certified wildlife habitat as an ambassador for native plants. Her work ensures all habitat programs and resources are rooted in sustainable practices and the latest science. Since 1977, Garden for Wildlife has been the nation's oldest and largest backyard habitat program, generating and supporting millions of wildlife gardeners in North America. Most recently, Mary helped launch Garden for Wildlife Native Plants Collection. The goal of this social enterprise is to increase the native plant supply, reduce carbon impacts, and secure survival of iconic species such as the monarch butterfly, native bees, and songbirds. The pilot launched in 2021, resulting in over 4,000 native plant collections sold in 5 months, translating to 237,000 square feet of new garden habitat. Welcome to the show, Mary.
Welcome, and thank you for having me. Really excited to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. So why don't we just start off right off the bat? Can you tell us more about the Garden for Wildlife organization?
Sure, thank you. So Garden for Wildlife is a signature program and the Certified Wildlife Habitat component of National Wildlife Federation. And I apologize for your notes. We actually started this in 1973, and we are going to be hitting our 50th year next year. So we're really, really excited about that. And that has been around basically encouraging people. We actually hit 280,000 certified wildlife habitats just this month. Thank you. These are places that people actually plant for wildlife by providing food, water, cover, and places to raise young. And the core piece of that are the native plants. And we recognize those people. They submit an application that they've done these different components and officially become certified wildlife habitats. So really excited to be celebrating all those people. And we do have people from across the US, really across North America, that do that.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So this like home gardeners as well as like public and community gardens?
Exactly. Actually, there's getting close to 10,000 schoolyard habitats in that mix of the 280,000. And it's about 90% residential private properties in that mix of the 280,000.
Cool. So you mentioned, just as you were describing Garden for Wildlife, you mentioned food, but you also mentioned, I think, a few other key considerations for wildlife that I don't think we naturally think of, such as a shelter.
Yes.
And what are those
Sure.
key?
Sure. So shelter, sometimes also known as cover, those are areas that you can do it with native shrubbery. You can obviously also provide birdhouses. There's a variety of ways, either supplemental things that you can do as a human, but we try to really also encourage the native habitats. So also leaving some old logs or snags for wildlife to create their homes in. So there's a variety of things that you can do for that. And we also mentioned places to raise young. And what's awesome about that, you could also have a birdhouse for that. But for like butterflies, you can also provide host plants, which we can talk about a little bit more as we in the show.
Okay. That's good.
Wonderful. You also mentioned your native plant collections. So you've sold over 4,000 native plant collections. What are the native plant collections? What are
I will tell you about those. And actually, that was our 2021 number. Now, as we've gotten through the 22 season, we are over 16,000 collections sold. And what these are a combination of native plants that we have curated for people that they can purchase kind of as a DIY starter garden for really to benefit butterflies, native bees, and also birds. And they include a design, they include all these different components. But the reason they're curated is we worked with the research of Dr. Doug Tallamy and also a pollinator conservationist to really look at the numbers that these specific plants support. So in the case of the butterflies and moths, the Lepidoptera, we've chosen plants that are keystone plants, which means they support up to 90% of butterflies and moths in a specific geographic area.
Wow. So that's true about all the different plants in each collection?
We include at least one or more of the keystone plants, and then also plants that are key hosts for pollen specialist bees, which are bees that can only, they're native bees. There's 4,000 across in the US. I think there's 20,000 across North America.
Yeah.
But those bees can only really get their pollen and nectar from specific plants that they've co-evolved with.
Interesting. Yeah, Doug Tallamy's research. So for any of our listeners, if you've not read Doug Tallamy, you definitely, I've heard him speak and I've read articles, but I haven't read his books yet. They're on my vacation list. But he spoke at Landscape Ontario a few years ago, pre-COVID. And it was just fascinating to just see, because I think a lot of people think, well, it's just insects, right? But it's not, because then the birds that feed off of those specific insects and the other animals that feed off of those birds, it really is the circle of life, and it is a food chain.
It is.
It really is. And I think about growing up as a little girl and can remember all the bugs on the windshield, right?
Right.
And that was something he referenced, and it was like a flash, oh my gosh, you're right. I can remember my dad, as a little kid and visiting my grandmother at night and him having to do the wipers.
Right.
And I've never had to do that for my kids, so it just shows you that the slowly and kind of not secretly, but just kind of that insects have been on the decline for many years.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes.
I do have a question that has come in from Lee. Lee writes in and says, hi, is this habitat government funded, or is it a private entity looking for donations? Thank you.
Thank you. So Garden for Wildlife is part of National Wildlife Federation, which is a 501c3. It's a nonprofit. And these different habitats, people actually just do on their own. So in the case of community groups, they might raise funds to purchase native plants. Maybe a school would have a special drive or something to get people to donate plants to create a beautiful habitat garden. But the majority of these are just individuals who've invested into their own properties and created these as well. The plants themselves are available online, and they go direct from growers to the consumer, but they are just for purchase, but that money is put back into our habitat work at National Wildlife Federation.
Okay. And so you are shipping plants, not just seeds.
Correct. It's individual collections of, well, it's a collection of individual plants that they're about, they've got a solid root base, and they're anywhere from 3 to 5 inches of growth, depending on when in the season they're shipped.
Yes.
And they go, right now we are in 36 states in the US. We don't currently have the ability to ship to Canada at this time.
Yes. Yeah.
So just for those listening, I don't know if we've mentioned it yet, but those plant collections, I believe you can find them gardenforwildlife.com.
Yes.
It's the main website with
Thank you.
tons of amazing information, photos, and lots of social media there as well. So definitely check out gardenforwildlife.com.
And for our Canadian listeners, if you go to nwf.org/native plant finder, you can get even more lists. We don't have all these plants to send you, but more comprehensive lists of plants. And I think it's mostly the US, so you would need to look at the border states.
Yes,
to
the
look
zones.
for your zones.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, our listeners are familiar with our lack of being able to ship even seeds back and forth and plants back and forth. So yeah, they're used to that, but that's okay. It just knowing where to go for the research, I think is really important.
Yes.
So thank you so much. That's great. And I think it's great and probably attributes to some of the success, because seed starting can be pretty tricky especially for novice growers. So I think you're starting people off for success by doing it as plants. I think that's an excellent idea.
Thank you.
Was it hard to get growers on board?
No, we've actually been really fortunate, and we're expanding as we go. Growers are really excited about this. The only challenge we've had is that when we launched and we're planning this original idea, it was pre-COVID. And so many growers were inundated, and as you know, gardeners and nurseries, because everyone was home during COVID. So we've had to stagger, their availability and capacity to produce more. But that's why one of the reasons we created it is that we were getting such a demand prior. We had been part of, and this was many Canadians were involved in this. We were part of coordinating the Million Pollinator Garden Challenge, and a number of Canadian organizations were involved with that. It was a North American effort, and we saw such an increase in demand in native plants. We realized we needed to incentivize some kind of system that could really help native plant growers, because one of the reasons we heard is they're like, well, we can't grow enough milkweed because we don't know if the consumers are still going to provide this like demand, and we've got to plan in advance for the planting season. So we really wanted to create this system to give predictability and profit to these growers.
That's great.
That's amazing. So you can find out all about which collection is right for you and all the amazing plants on that beautiful website that I just totally forgot, gardenforwildlife.com.
Gardenforwildlife.com. Thank you.
I got them up going between both
That's
of them.
all right.
They're just
That's
so
awesome.
beautiful.
So is there any statistics, so we know that the plants unfortunately stop at the borders, right? So the Canadians, we have our pollinating plants and you have your pollinating plants, but that the butterflies go,
They don't stop.
They go, right? They come through the borders. There's no borders for them. And then they continue to Mexico.
Yes.
So has there been any research as to where there may be more of an issue, like where they're getting, let's say, stuck, or where they're not doing well?
Yeah. So the challenges and is really what we've seen across the US as they come from Canada down to Mexico has been, everywhere where we've have development that has wiped out habitat, but significantly the central migratory corridor, which is really, from just the borders of Canada down through like Minnesota, all through the central part of the United States, through Texas. That also is been a highly agricultural belt. So you've got the combination of, monocultural crops and the use of chemicals and pesticides for agriculture, as well as all of our populated cities where there's, less habitat. So it's really those areas. And that's why we have these kinds of programs where people are creating habitat where they live, and to kind of at least give some stopping points and
help mitigate it, right? Yeah, because I wondered about Texas. Like, I think we need Texas to be on board, right? Because I feel like the movement in Canada and Ontario, like, people are growing, and there's been some, local social media people say, like, they cannot believe, like, everybody's got milkweed in their garden now, and everybody's growing pollinator plants, and nobody's seeing any butterflies. So it's been like, and even some, like, some of the, like, there's a grower, Anna's perennials, like, so she's like, all of our plants that we, that she's in kind of northern, she's not too far from where I am in east, in the GTA, but she was she did a recent post saying, we're surrounded, we've got our garden center and all of our native plants, and we're surrounded by, wildflowers everywhere and stuff. And they're still in 2 years, she goes, there's 50% less. Oh, yeah. So I'm like, oh my goodness. So I don't know, like, I know there's always going to be ups and downs though, right?
Well, weather's a big part of it. So sometimes that has impacted, various populations of monarchs coming through, if there's a freeze or if there's, that kind of thing. So it is challenging. And as many people probably may or may not know, that these are generations of monarchs that come from Canada to Mexico. So we always say, like, where I live in Maryland, you're seeing the children and grandchildren of different, monarch families, I guess, if you will, that make it down to Mexico. And then Mexico is where they really track the numbers of those overwintering populations. And that's where we get the data of what has been successful in making that full migration.
Excellent. All right, it looks like we've got some questions, Matt.
Oh, I was going to say, I think, speaking of monarchs, as we hit into the monarchs, lots of our listeners have sent in questions about monarch butterflies. Gail has written in, hello folks, this is quite the show. How long do butterflies live? Thank you.
So they actually don't live, they can sometimes live, so the adult who lays their eggs over the summer, it's sometimes just several weeks, to a month, because that's just their lifespan.
Yeah. And like you said, there's multiple generations within. Those who are flying north are not the same ones who are flying south.
Correct. Right.
And it could be 1-2 generations in between. Yeah. So Dawn Smith has already also written in, hello tonight. If I picked up a butterfly, does it hurt them? If not, what is the best way to do that? Thanks. My grandkids love them. They're reaching for their butterflies.
Sure. I mean, ideally, we're not touching them too much because it does affect the pigmentation on their wings and so forth. So it's better to let them alight on you as opposed to picking up their wings.
Yeah. And that's one of the amazing things about the Butterfly Conservatory in Niagara Falls. In Canada, you can those bright colors and they all just come and land on you. Cool. Investigate. Joyce has also written in, hi down the garden path. What plants attract butterflies? So maybe, Mary, do you have or do you see in your sales, is there like a top 5, or is there, the best-selling package? Which ones would those
Sure. Well, we have some fun packages called Monarch Munchables and Pollinator Power. And in those, we have different host plants. So we talked about that a little bit earlier. Milkweed is the host plant for the monarch butterfly. There are other host plants that we have for other types of butterflies in the collections. And those are the plants that these particular species can, are the only plants they can actually lay their eggs, and their caterpillars will consume and create their chrysalis and turn into monarch butterflies. But we also provide very high producing nectar plants like asters, goldenrod. Those are keystone perennials, really, for butterflies and moths. And they support so many different species, really in the hundreds. So those are some key examples. Sunflowers are another really key species as well.
Really?
Yes.
Okay. I think of squirrels. When I think of sunflowers, I think of the squirrels.
Well, so those are the really big, mammoth, and those are great too. But the native sunflowers,
Okay,
really don't bother those. But they provide amazing nectar. They're high. They have they support tons of generalist bees as well, bumblebees and others. So they're really phenomenal. And then eventually they do go to seed and support, finches and other types of birds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay.
Beautiful.
That's good.
Thank you, Joyce, for that question. Stuart has also written in, hi, Joanne and Matt. I remember a past show of yours on chickens. Wow, from chickens to butterflies. Love it. My question, do monarch butterflies sleep or do they not sleep? Thanks. So, Mary, do you know if they sleep?
It's embarrassing. That particular one, I'm going to assume they sleep. I actually will need to look that one up. I apologize. I've not ever been asked that before.
Yeah, I think they rest. I think they rest.
They definitely rest.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
We'll
have to look that one up.
Get back to you there, Stuart.
Yeah.
Ron has also written in a couple more questions. Hi, is it legal to sell and buy butterflies to breed them?
So it depends on the state. We at National Wildlife Federation do not promote people selling and trading in butterflies or really any wildlife. It's not conducive to their survival. In small settings, it's okay, especially we would say grow a patch of milkweed so you can actually see and watch the caterpillars and them go through their actual life cycle. That's ideal. Some educators are able sometimes to take those into the classroom on a small scale that, as long as it's limited. But the more that we're buying and selling those, you could, in a controlled kind of farm-like setting, it really actually breeds a lot of disease. So we don't advocate for that.
Yeah, for sure. I could see that. What do you think of, I know several, including my mother-in-law who's probably listening, people who like rescue the eggs, like the baby caterpillars, and bring them inside and kind of raising them just for thinking that it's better success and trying to, wait for them to go into the chrysalis and then releasing them once they have. What are your thoughts?
So it's kind of similar, obviously in a small setting for education, that can be okay. We're a part of Monarch joint venture. We collaborate with them. They have some excellent resources for safely raising educational purpose monarchs in that kind of setting that you described. But both they and we kind of would prefer that happens outdoors and you just naturally create that habitat.
Yes. Yeah. Actually, I mean, me too, right? I can see they're thinking that because at my mother-in-law's building, she knows the maintenance people are just going to come and cut down that milkweed, right? So she in her mind, she's rescuing it, and then feeding, and she's done it successfully.
Yeah. Lots of people do. It's an emotional, passionate
thing to do.
To do. Yes.
Yeah. But providing for things outside in the garden is preferred, certainly. Yes, we do have Roy is asking, saying, that it's a great topic tonight. And beside plants, are there any other foods or anything else we can put out to attract the butterflies? Or I guess we're not just wanting to attract them, we're wanting to help them.
Yes. So a puddling dish is really great. And that's a shallow dish with pebbles and stones. It has a very limited amount of water that you would want to, change out and empty every once in a while. So you're not also getting mosquitoes. But that is important because monarchs and also native bees, they don't go in and slurp up a lot like in a bird bath. They just sip very delicately, and they also get the minerals that are from the stones and things that are in those kinds of puddling dishes.
Oh, good. And you mentioned earlier about logs, like logs and
yes, that's more for other kinds of wildlife.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So did you also mention the Monarch joint venture?
Yes, they are a collaborative in the U.S. and it's a joint venture. So there's many conservation organizations that have partnered with them, and we do some, promotional stuff, education with that.
Nice. Well, so I was just quickly looking up Stuart's question, and they were the ones who came up about whether or not do monarchs sleep.
Yes.
Right. And it depends on according to them, it depends on what you consider sleep. They rest at night or when it's cool in trees and shrubs and other sheltered areas, but they do so just kind of like most insects. They don't have eyelids, and
Correct.
it's a state called torpor,
Yes.
and they just kind of hang out there for a bit when
Yes.
it's cool or slow or dark.
Yes.
Yeah. So there you go,
Excellent.
Stuart.
Yeah.
All right. And I think we have Sam, who's also just written in as well. Hi, Joanne and Matt. Cool show. What is the main reason or reasons that monarch butterflies are dying off?
Yeah. So I touched on it a little bit earlier, but one of the main reasons is, the core reason is that their habitat is disappearing. So that's one of the reasons we're really trying to, encourage people at such massive scales to replicate the milkweed habitat along with nectar plants. But the absolute other really critical thing is not to use chemicals, because there's so many pesticides and herbicides in our environment that are systemic, and any of these insects that take nectar or pollen or eat the leaves of these plants, it kills them. It's systemic, and it's that has been a huge problem. And then the climate a little bit, the weather adaptations, that's an impact as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the unpredictability of the weather and the extremes, right?
Yeah, for sure. So in the bio, and we labeled monarch as one of them, you mentioned the term iconic species. So what makes an iconic species or a species iconic?
An iconic species is one that so many of us have a real emotional, kind of visceral connection to. You guys are in Canada, and we were just sharing before the show started, our memories of these butterflies from childhood. And particularly because this particular one has such a wide migration area, there's just, millions of people that have experienced this butterfly. And so it's also stunning culturally. From here to Mexico, it's a symbol of heritage, locale, and particularly in Mexico, amazing cultural festivals around the monarch that are, indigenous people and others have embraced this species for generations. And so it's not only, the biological impact, but it's also this emotional, cultural connection to the species.
Yeah, and that's definitely true about the monarch for sure. We were just out this week and thinking, we haven't seen any monarchs, and now we've been counting them as we go. And I think over the last week and a half, we've seen maybe 2. So
yeah. And I feel like it has almost been the opposite. Like the more people are talking about it and the more people are planting, but we're still not seeing them, but it just depends where you are in the luck of, the location. Right. So I get that they still could be there.
It does. I think it's also, we're not out in our gardens all day.
Yes, it's true.
We
do work for a living, right?
Yeah. But I will tell you, so when in my area, my neighborhood, the beginning of the pandemic, the neighbors got together and we did at our entrance to the community, a big butterfly garden, and it's full of milkweed. And we planted tiny plugs in the beginning of June, and by July it was covered with caterpillars, and it was on a highway, like median, a little off to the side, entrance to our community. So you just really, I think you do need some density of milkweed that helps. And then it also, there are certain areas that they do migrate in larger quantities, so I think that's part of it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Very nice. Yeah. Well, as we reach the bottom of the hour, I'm going to do my thing here and just take a break and say thank you, everyone, for joining us here live on Reality Radio 101. I'm Matthew Dressing here with my co-host and co-author, Joanne Shaw, and you're listening to Down the Garden Path. Joanne and I enjoy hosting Down the Garden Path each week, bringing you interesting and relevant topics to help you achieve a great garden. We learn right along with you from our research and from the wonderful guests that join us here on this show, such as Mary Phillips from Garden for Wildlife and the National Wildlife Federation, as we talk all about monarchs and native plants. So don't forget, you can spend more time with us down the garden path. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Down the Garden Path Podcast is our handle there. You can also find us on your favorite podcast provider with lots of past episodes and wonderful information. While you're there, please hit that subscribe button to be notified of new content. And please don't forget to like, share, and leave us a comment. We love hearing from you. You can always write us, get a hold of us any time of the day, even though we're not on the show. You can rate us at Down the Garden Path Podcast at hotmail.com. You can also find us via our websites. You can find Joanne at down2earth.ca and myself at naturalaffinity.ca. So what else should we need to know, or do we need to know about creating beautiful habitats for our monarchs? Is there anything we've missed?
I think the other key thing is using these sustainable practices. The good thing about native plants is they're pretty adaptable to the areas that they are native to. So you don't need to amend the soil with super rich, fertilizers or those kinds of things. I think people sometimes think that, and sometimes that does more harm than good for the viability of the plants initially. And if you're actually planting small plants or from seed, really making sure that you are watering them until they get established. They usually obviously adapt to the natural area and the rainfall that you have, but they've got to get established in that first year.
Right.
Yeah.
I think I just totally went blank on that, but Sean's going to save me here.
Yeah.
Sean says, hi, Down the Garden Path. Is milkweed poisonous for small kids or pets? Thank you.
So milkweed does have a toxin that's actually beneficial to the monarch butterfly. It is definitely something children or kids should not eat, but they should not eat most plants unless they're edibles.
For sure.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So my question that I totally blanked, thanks for jumping in there, Sean, was a lot of people have, that grower soil, that garbage, quote unquote, air quotes, that they start with in a new subdivision, or they've neglected their soil. And I think they just feel the urge that, I'm creating this garden, or, my soil is crap. What can I do? Would you still say, is that true? Do they need to amend anything with?
I think it depends, obviously, how disrupted that area has been. But if it's, I think trying it out at first, or having your soil tested, is really is helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And I know in the US you can go to extension agents often to do that. But I mean, overall, native plants are pretty hardy, so I would try it based on what you have. They're pretty adaptable to clay soils. I mean, the key thing is, if it's hard packed and you can't plant, then obviously you need to loosen it up and make it a little more moist and adaptable.
Definitely. And I think, like you say too, our native plants are so robust and adaptable, right? There are natural places like where we are here in Canada. Our native soil is a clay loam. So, we do have clay in the soil, and clay is a good part of soil, but give it a try. You may not have that bad stuff, or as bad stuff.
And you did make a good point about the numbers, planting one milkweed plant may not do much. It's kind of, but I feel like there's this misnomer that, oh no, it's going to take over, right? If I plant milkweed, it's so invasive, it's going to take over.
Good point. So if you have a large area, or you're along a field or a farm area that you can control along a fence, the common milkweed is ideal, and you will see more monarchs to that really tall common milkweed, and that does spread. But if you're in a small urban or suburban setting, we recommend the orange butterfly milkweed, or the swamp milkweed, some of the smaller, compact, almost shrub-like sizes of milkweed. And that's what we actually have in our collections, because these really are going to smaller areas.
Right. Okay. That's a good point. Yes. I planted some of the butterfly milkweed this year.
Oh, good.
As well. Because in the past, I've gotten like little pots of it and not been successful, because, you have to keep watering it, like you said. And this time I found a pot that was really well established.
Oh, nice.
So I've been like babying it and so hopefully I don't kill it with kindness, because that's always the other challenge.
Yes.
Do things like mulch like benefit or disadvantage, or not benefit having the beneficial insects?
Yeah. So, well, no, the mulch actually, like, especially when you're starting a garden and to keep the moisture in and around these newly established plants, mulch is fine. Obviously it's a natural seasoned shredded hardwood, not something that's like fresh wood chips, because that's not, the nitrogen's too much for the plants. And then that's fine. But the other thing is to think about low growing grasses as kind of a green mulch. And that's something we're looking into for this next year to actually provide as well in these collections.
Oh, that's interesting.
Like a carex or some of those species. Yeah.
Okay. Green mulch. That's interesting.
Right. Do your plant collections, I think we always think of, a certain time of bloom when I think of like echinaceas and rudbeckias and milkweeds. Do your plant collections provide plants? Do they all bloom at one time, I guess is what my question is.
Excellent question. No, they do not. Because we want to provide bloom for the wildlife across 3 seasons at least. And so usually the ones that we have just blanked on the name of it, Spring Bee Buffet, which is we're trying to get more spring ephemerals so that you could have a collection that blooms in earlier spring but then into the summer. But the bulk of them are kind of core, the Monarch Munchables, the Pollinator Power. We have a Firefly Delight as well. They are designed to, like, really their bloom is like different plants, May through summer through early fall, and some late fall as well.
Okay.
So there's a good seasonal coverage for everybody. And I think we all think monarchs, but like you said, it's wildlife. There's all these other components that really make everything work together.
Yes.
Do you have a list of, so maybe they're not obviously in your little kit that you sent out, but shrubs? I'm on the show, I'm the shrub girl. And and they do play an important part. But are there any specific shrubs that are more attractive to
So buttonbush is a great one. Elderberry, another really beautiful blooming shrub that helps so many pollinators. And then there's shrub-like that also are like boneset, and some others that they get really big and they kind of look, like a shrub. And even in the early spring, so the false indigo, the blue indigo, Baptisia it's a perennial, but it becomes quite big and shrub-like in your yard, and it has these gorgeous stalks that are really great for early spring bees.
Okay, that's good to know. But as far as the monarchs go, they prefer milkweed. So I don't know if our listeners know that is the only thing.
Yes.
We want them to lay their eggs on the milkweed, and that's the only thing that their caterpillars can eat to successfully turn into butterflies. So
correct. Thank you.
Yes. In Ontario, we have an issue with a plant called dog strangling vine. Was you going to say that, Matt? So
literally,
I don't know if it's in the U.S. at all, or if you've heard of it.
What's the Latin name? Do you know?
The Latin name is, just had it here. Vince toxicum rossicum. Vince toxicum nigrum.
I do not. I'm not aware of that in the U.S., but I'll have to look that one up.
Yeah. So apparently I thought they were in the milkweed family, but it's not. It just is a lookalike member of the milkweed family. And it is literally like, it strangles any plant. So it's in our ravines, it's in our forests, and it's strangling things. But because it looks like milkweed and the seed heads are very much like milkweed, that we have an issue that's where the butterflies are laying their eggs. And of course, they can't eat that. The caterpillars can't eat it. So it is one of the things I think in Ontario, I can only speak for Ontario as far as Canada goes, but that's something we can all do because it's in our neighborhoods. Not many people know what it is. Like when I go for walks and people have like wound it up on their fence and stuff, and I'm like ripping it out. And it is, oh my gosh, what's the weed killer? Blah, blah, blah. Not
Roundup.
Roundup. Roundup won't kill it.
Wow.
So it's really the only, and getting it out of the ground is actually quite hard. So at least if we can get it before it goes to seed. So for all our listeners, please look up dog strangling vine. If you see it, it needs to go in the garbage if you are managing to pull it out. So public service announcement, doesn't go in the compost, doesn't go in the paper bags that we put at the curb. It needs to go in a black garbage bag. And I think we've just spread the word naturally to our neighbors and our friends about it. And there's many reasons. One, it's not good for the plants either because it is smothering and killing plants. Right. But it also has that other situation where it's mistaken by the butterflies.
Yeah, the monarch and as well as other like native butterfly species.
Yeah. That's really good to know, but I'll have to check that out. I have not heard about that in the US. Our challenge is the tropical milkweed, which is not native, and it does like provide nectar, and it is a milkweed, but it's not native to the US, and it actually keeps a lot of monarchs in the warmer states like from migrating because it's so plentiful. And then in those areas, it does sometimes spread disease through the monarch populations.
I see, because their generation's not changing.
Right.
Oh, wow. That's
interesting.
Scary.
Yeah, interesting problem. So I always do my little infomercial for dog strangling vine because it just is people just don't know. So
yeah,
and if you want to learn a little bit more about it, just for everybody, Invasive Species Center with re.ca has a wonderful little write-up and fact sheet and pictures and identification and impacts fact sheet there for you too. So invasivespeciescenter.ca is a great resource as well.
Mm-hmm. And I obviously want to promote gardenforwildlife.com.
Yes,
but
absolutely.
I do want to support, across the border here are wonderful people we've worked with in the past at the David Suzuki Foundation who do amazing amounts of work with milkweed and for the monarch. And the Canadian Wildlife Federation has a somewhat similar, they don't, as far as I know, they don't offer plants, but they have a similar habitat program that we do here in the States at National Wildlife Federation. So
yes, you can become a ranger. Yes, you can become a Butterfly Way ranger, which I kind of have become one. I'm still working on that. I have the signs, and
that's with David Suzuki, right?
Yes, with David Suzuki. Yeah. So definitely recommend looking for that. I'm a landscape designer in the industry, so it's always like I have all these aspirations in my off season that I'm going to do all these extra things.
Right.
But I'm sure you working in it, right, makes it hard to do personally. But I was excited about the milkweed. I have poke milkweed. I thought it was swamp milkweed, but I've just recently learned that it's poke milkweed, and now I have butterfly weed. So I'm trying. Yes.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah. So always.
Mary, what about your certified wildlife habitat program? Is it just for the States, or can you also become certified in Canada?
You can submit and we can send you a certificate and we'll recognize you in Canada. So we would love for you to do that. But like I said, the Canadian Wildlife Federation has also a kind of similar Garden for Wildlife effort. I don't think it's been around as long as ours, but they may have more resources for other parts of Canada, plant lists and things to look at as well. But we would love, we do certified wildlife habitat. We have I think 22 embassies certified around the world, which is super cool. So we are definitely want to spread this native habitat message as far as we can.
Absolutely. And on that note, so now we're like late August or mid-August. Yeah. So Linda's asking, what time of year would we see the most monarchs, and when do they start to migrate? So Linda, I think that depends on where you are, but yes.
Yeah. So right now, the bulk of monarchs at this time of year are coming down through the US, and it's really key sightings obviously are anywhere along the central migratory pathway. This September, there's often a huge congregation, that's not the right word, whatever, gathering, these monarchs in like the Cape May, New Jersey area. They have a big festival. And then in McAllen, Texas, like that's kind of where we're at in the migratory path of volume of monarchs. And then, but I think as we go and look through the whole journey in Canada, I think it's earlier in the season that you would be seeing them for the most part.
Yeah. Yeah, I think now it's pretty popular. I think we're starting to see them start to head down there.
Yes.
For sure. And then in Mexico, it's kind of the end of, isn't it kind of around Halloween, like October, November, beginning of November?
The monarch count happens in February. So January, February, that the real volume of monarchs are down there, because that's when they start really they're always counting them, but the bulk of that wintering population, that's when they are counted. And then those numbers are usually come out at the end of February each year. This year it was somewhat delayed, but
okay. Yeah, so that really is a long cycle, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Wow, isn't that fascinating?
It is. It really is.
It really is.
Yeah.
It really, when you stop to really think about it, in Mother Nature, it is amazing. And I think it's amazing that we can do a little bit. Everybody can do a little bit. I think that's my biggest message, right?
Yes.
Whether it's, even if it's just one plant, everybody can do, although we know we want but more of that one plant,
but many people doing one plant in an area, helps too. And that's one of the things, I mean, it does spread with its seed. Not the smaller ones do not aggressively, but enough to increase your patch and increase the opportunity for you to see monarchs.
Nice. Well, Steve has written in as well, and he's wondering, does your guest have a book out? If so, where can we check it out?
Well, I personally do not have a book, though that is a dream of mine. But we do have a book about our Garden for Wildlife program that was written by our naturalist, David Mizejewski. And if you go to nwf.org/garden/resources, we have tip sheets and other kinds of resources, webinars, and the book is featured there as well.
Excellent. Beautiful. So lots of resources. Yeah, the websites are absolutely beautifully well done. So if you guys haven't had a chance, nwf.org for the National Wildlife Federation website, and gardenforwildlife.com, where there's lots of information. There's a plant finder quiz, and you can shop all sorts of wonderful plant collections there as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, Mary, what would you recommend? We've talked about native plants, these keystone plants supporting iconic species. I think sometimes, kind of as Joanne kind of alluded to, a lot of people think native plants and they kind of think derogatory, like weeds or something invasive or spreading. If we were going to get involved with native plants, where should we start? Do you have any recommendations or maybe a way to look at it? Just maybe it doesn't seem so as overwhelming and wild.
Sure. So one of the tip sheets we have on our website really does help you think about structure and form. So looking at the different growth patterns of some of the native plants so that you can have like a coreopsis border, which is a lower growing, yellow plant, obviously finding the one that's native to you. And then staggering, a lot of the plants are big. I like to think of it as kind of, I guess in this case, since we're talking across North America, kind of a North American cottage garden look, as opposed to like an English cottage garden. But it's, North American native cottage garden look. And I think thinking about it that way, and also putting in features that, like birdhouses, like, some of these really neat plant supports that are multicolored or just look really cool, that, you can add some contrast to the textures of the plants and also support them and keep them upright and a little more maintained, because there is a fear. People are like, these are, a lot of these grow in the wild and it's going to be like just like a big meadow in a confined area. People get nervous about that, but there's ways to, architecturally structure it, and also pick plants that bloom throughout the seasons, that have good texture, that balance, kind of more shrub-like with those that are, like I said, the lower growing kind of almost ground cover types.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think you can have other, like I think of the poor hydrangea, right? Everybody loves hydrangeas. Unfortunately, they're not really a pollinator plant,
Right.
but they do add some structure. So, you can have the monarda and the coneflowers and the different things. And like you said, you can still have an attractive garden. So I feel like people tend to be, it's all or none kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
And
to support wildlife, we kind of recommend, because we realize people have their favorites of these plants they've grown up with that are kind of heirloom or heritage, like whether they're roses or hydrangeas or lilacs. It's kind of an 80-20, like 80% natives, and then balance it out with those others that you also really love.
Yeah, exactly. And they can do exactly like you said, add structure and help contain and help beautify some of the native plants as well, because I think sometimes when they start to lose their seed, and we want to leave them to lose their seed and let the bees and the birds eat from them, they don't necessarily look their best, but that they're functional, so I think that's what I find in my yard. I was tired of fighting the chipmunks, so we just feed the garden for birds with the plants, with the pagoda dogwoods and with our dogwoods and with our grasses and stuff that the birds can eat from. And they do. So it's very wonderful to see. So I think people have to kind of change their view of the garden, and that native, it doesn't mean it has to all be native plants. Right.
So as we reach the last 6 minutes of the show, Mary, is there anything else you want to, let our listeners know about or share with us before we wrap up the show this evening?
Thank you. I think I'm just really thrilled. One of the things I love about creating this habitat, and the fact that there are no borders when we're talking about wildlife, and when we're talking about these regions. So there's another, kind of way to look at this, is that we're all part of, various ecoregions. And I think that's, actually how we also are curating these plants in these collections, is at the ecoregion level. And so, I think it's important. I think, this migratory path of the monarch, it kind of connects us all, because we all can do our part. So it's something that we're all kind of doing. So I really, love the fact that the monarch migration connecting us throughout North America. I think looking at not only the impact that we can make, but also the symbolism and the heritage of the species, is a way that we're really all connected.
Yes. And we can all really do our part. Yeah, I love that.
Yes. And there is, I think, a bunch of ecoregion. If you're wondering more about your ecoregion, there's a lot more to be said about the ecoregions and which one you're in. I found it on nwf.org.
Yes.
There's some very deep and interesting resources there for that too.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, actually, if you go to nwf.org/keystone plants, we have ecoregion lists of plants as well. And you can look at the ecoregion map and figure out where you are.
Yes.
That's what I was trying to find my way back to. I saw that big, beautiful map that makes it so visual to see, the world through the eco zones. It's just beautiful.
Yeah. And the more knowledge we share about the different plants that people can use, and the different practices. I know Matt and I speak about a lot on the show of the practice of, they used to be like, put the garden to bed in the fall and clean it all up and cut everything back. And really we're finding that really we're hurting their habitats. So really it's best to spread the word to your friends and neighbors also, that it's okay to leave the plants up. It doesn't matter what happens in winter. You can let the garden just go to rest and then do that tidy up in the spring.
And just in closing, I mean, there's actual science that we actually have been part of. So our certified wildlife habitats across 5 metro areas in the US have been studied in suburban and urban areas, and actually have found that the more areas that have certified wildlife habitats within them actually show higher bird species diversity and turnover, as well as the diversity of butterflies and bees. It was a study that was funded by the National Science Foundation over several years, and they're studying all these different kinds of landscapes. So the certified wildlife habitat yard versus the lawn heavy yard versus like a xeriscape, and also natural areas. And these studies are really amazing. And we actually have a webinar. It's like, if you build it, they will come, and it tells you about the impact and all the papers that have been written on that. And that's also in that resources section that I mentioned, nwf.org/garden. And then you go to resources, and it has those webinars and those papers. And then there were other studies that really showed that if you created this elements of habitat with the native plant concentration and diversity of native plants, you can, really, it's like you'll see 50% more wildlife than a yard that's like traditionally lawn heavy with lots of ornamentals. So it's not just like fun and beautiful. You're actually we have science that shows this makes a huge impact.
Excellent. Well, that's great.
That is beautiful. That is wonderful. Yeah, because I think that's the big word, right? Is go back to natives and, support and climate change. And yeah, it's nice to see the science.
Yeah.
As well.
It does have to balance. I mean, as a landscape designer whose homeowners are coming along, but for the most part, they still want, the pretty low maintenance gardens, right? They don't want their front yards to necessarily look like a field. So there really has to be, I'm working really hard to figure out, many of us designers are, just to make sure we're incorporating as many native plants as possible, but still helping set up the clients with success and in yards.
Yeah, absolutely. And but the beauty of it is there's such a selection of native plants out there that have various form as well as function. So you can, and I'm sure you guys, have beautiful designs that incorporate all that as well.
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
Well, that brings us to another wonderful episode. Thank you so much, Mary, for joining us this evening and sharing all this wonderful knowledge on monarchs and native plants. And I'm sure there are hundreds of listeners out there tonight who have been inspired to dabble and build and grow more to support our native iconic species, especially the monarch. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And thanks for all you guys are doing in this space. It's wonderful to be in the
that's
show.
Great.
Well, thank you. So yes, everyone, check out Mary Phillips and her colleagues, all the wonderful efforts. Definitely check out gardenforwildlife.com as well as nwf.org and all the wonderful native plant and garden resources there.
We'll have all of that and all your social media and everything in our show notes as well. So tune in. So those are live listeners as well as people who will listen later on the podcast. Everything will be there for you to do some more research. And and that's great.
Exactly. Oh, I always forget the show notes bit.
That's okay.
And speaking about listening later next week's episode, we are not going to be here. However, we have lined up with you a repeat episode of the Food Garden Life Show, starring Emma Biggs and Stephen Biggs, also here in realityradio101.com. What's special about it is Joanne and I have joined Stephen and Emma, our fellow broadcasters, and we're talking all about garden tips as well as the new Down the Garden Path book. Down the Garden Path is step-by-step to your Ontario garden. So check that out next week at our regular time on August 22nd. In the meantime, again, another heartfelt, I can say that. Thank you to Mary for joining us this evening. Thank you everyone for tuning in here on Reality Radio 101. And we will see you next week. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Down the Garden Path with your host, Joanne Shaw and Matthew Dressing, right here on Reality Radio 101.